from your small groups. I'm just testing to see if the dead space is still here. And hey, that's pretty great. Yeah, so we didn't fade out here anymore. So for me, going around and listening to all 4 small groups was great because the energy in those groups was fantastic. I was particularly in love with the group back here, so I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of what that report out sounds like. So while we're waiting for others to gather, I think there are a few people who are still milling around. We're going to go ahead and start, and the idea is for each group, for each group, there will be a 3 to 5 minute presentation where we're going to try to, in fast order, somehow, reflect all the richness that was there in the conversation. So that's a really hard thing to do, but I'm really sure that Andrew's going to be acing this. Ready?
Good morning. My name is Andrew DeSello. I'm with MSI. I facilitated the innovation methods and tools discussion. We had about a dozen people from different government agencies as well as some consultants. So we had a very quick but rich discussion of, we were looking at what methodologies and tools, technological or other, are being used to kindle innovative work or processes. We did some individual brainstorming and then sort of shared those back with the group. So we came up with about 3 pages worth of ideas on the flip chart. I won't go through each one individually, but I'll sort of hit some of the high points. One of the themes that came across was this idea of really connecting people across silos, whether that's within a particular agency. This idea that people we're all familiar with get very focused on their area, their area of responsibility, and they don't necessarily share resources or share ideas across one another. And so there were some, and this also applies at we had an example of an international scale where we have challenges like Ebola and some of these global diseases. And in one instance, there's a project that's working to create sort of multi-country, multi-stakeholder platforms, and bringing those organizations together to be able to share ideas, discuss, and to be able to address these global problems. So that was really important, and this is also evident in our just internally within an organization. We had another example of a very simple solution, which was there's in this large DoD, there's some organizations that have more resources than others, and one approach was just to connect them with a phone call, with a sharing an email, and getting permission to make that outreach to another department to ask about tapping into their resources for certain things, and that's been very effective and sort of surprised people that it could be done. It took a little bit of agreement from leadership to allow that. Sometimes there's turf, but it was more successful than one thought. So I think the innovation there was just, and this was a similar thing. Just sometimes you just have to ask, why not? Why can't we do that outreach? Sometimes there were more specific, deliberative approaches to foster innovation. In one case, there was an ideation lab that's being promoted that's really getting the IT team, product development teams to get together before as they work on their products, not just think about what the pain points are, but what additional things could they address? What would their customers like to see besides just what their products are? So it was very deliberative. Another instance was a consulting firm they actually gave time and paid folks to take a moment, reflect, read the latest book or cutting edge research, and then discuss it and think about how they could apply that to the solutions that they offer their clients. Another idea was sort of reflected in the keynote this morning was about creating innovation by getting people out of the office, getting them out of DC, getting them to the field, getting them to the front lines, to again understand, feel empowered about what they're doing, but also it inspired creativity. They had a new perspective about how their organization was delivering services, who their customers were, and how the things that they could do they could make changes and be a little bit more creative. And then the last one I just raised is this idea of using research both to inform the design of services you might deliver. For example, there's a new training that was put out for the military that was based on a lot of research on helping soldiers that are in high stress situations make better decisions, be a little bit more calm in the moment, and use better discretion, and then implementing that and using the research and the data that comes from that, evaluating that to see if that training is actually working. So that was, again, being innovative in using research to design your activities, and then using evaluation to assess it and make changes. Thank you. Thanks to our group.
Thank you. We'll see what group is up next. Let's see what's underneath here. Public-private partnerships.
Hey, hello everybody. My name is Mary Liakos, and I am also with Management Systems International. I'm a trainer and facilitator. And we had a small but very participatory group, which was great. This is a topic that wasn't discussed really anyplace else during our morning together, so we were glad for the opportunity to have this time. We had a couple of themes that just ran through. One is that this idea of the top level person, for example, the CIO, being a chief sort of disruptor. One of the points about that was that it wasn't sort of enough for maybe a number 2 person to be leading up a charge, but really it was the change that needed to be sanctioned, if you will, from the top. Local government, we observed, is really probably more effective at public-private partnerships than the federal government is. And it's not that it can't happen, but we just had that observation because some of the folks in our group had also worked with local government. We also said that government really doesn't have the space for failures, whereas private sector generally does. The private sector makes accommodations for that, whereas the federal government probably acknowledges that it was happened, but it doesn't really give that space. And that brings us to the question of higher risk. One of our folks in our group works in talent management and was saying that, there's higher risk for bringing private sector people into government. It's more, it's easier for a private sector person to make that switch into public sector person to go to the private sector. But once you do the opposite, there are all kinds of structural, gymnastics that one has to do. The cost-benefit analysis differs for government. I think that would probably sort of speak for itself, if you will. And there are risks with media coverage. We talked a lot about risks, as you'll see in our group. There may not be waste, but there may be a perception of waste. And the public doesn't have a lot of appetite for that. But as one of our folks said, and I'll call him out by name, Orlando, said, in order to get great benefit, there may be great risk. And I think that really was kind of the overall theme of our group. Thanks very much, and thanks to my group. Unveil the next one. My colleague Gail Namoli will join us for the next one.
So our group was inspiring the workforce. You see it right up there. What approaches are working to unleash or develop creativity and ingenuity in the government workforce? And we had a very rich discussion. It was fascinating. In the GSA context, they have an approach. They had a leader. Someone was talking about the importance of the other 2 folks talked about the importance of leadership. There was someone at the GSA who believed in this approach of fail fast, fail forward, which involved having parameters within which you had to operate, but the idea that if you're going to try something, try it, find out quickly if it's going to work, And then if it doesn't work, make sure you use that as an opportunity to go forward. I thought that was a pretty innovative approach. The HHS folks have an Ignite Accelerator, whereby they allow staff, and of course I don't know all the details, you might want to check with your HHS colleagues, but they allow groups to come together and with an idea, and then take that idea forward. Along the process, they get training in human-centered design, and they are encouraged to generate their ideas as they go along. Again, a very interesting approach. We didn't get to the chance of talking about results they've had, but again, you might want to follow up on that. OPM wanted to, they talked about, and I'm not going to remember the name, but there is every year there's a survey that goes out, the federal employees, can someone help me? Yeah, you're all familiar with it. That there can be a tendency to try in only 1 year to make some kind of incremental improvement. And what they were talking about was you might want to avoid the pursuit of quick fixes, because in fact 1 year is a pretty short time to make the difference. So that's an approach that they are advocating. Another part of OPM is working on micro-learning. They are trying to find ways to encourage people not to be limited by their expectations of being able to work within their silos. So there was an example given of taking 3 different groups that got together and were able to talk, and I can remember the 2 groups, HR and policy. The 3rd group, I'm sorry, I've forgotten. The hiring manager, thank you. And so, thank you very much. And so they were able to get together and find out, well, geez, we didn't know we could do that. That's really eye-opening. That gives us a lot more freedom. So we called that the micro-learning. They call it the micro-learning approach. And we did have a consultant who works with Social Security Administration, and this was the idea of discovering your customers. So it was looking at what are your customers' pain points, but also look across and find out who your customers are. It brought to mind what Stephen was talking about this morning, of finding out who your customers are and figuring out what is it they need as opposed to what is it that you're providing. And the last person suggested that you should think about hiring for curiosity. As a general rule, an approach to stimulating innovation would be to hire for curiosity. Thank you, and thank you to my group.
Thank you. I think we have one more.
Hi, I'm Brian Calhoun with Management Systems International, and I was facilitating the Technology Solutions Group. Our prompt was, what current or emerging game-changing technologies will have the biggest impact on government programs and service delivery in the next 5 years? And we had a small group, but we brought together a little bit of local government expertise and a little bit of federal government expertise, and realized the problems were generally fairly similar. So what they had both been dealing with was staff who spent too much time processing the data, crunching data to get to the output. They kind of wear themselves out. They don't have the creativity. They don't have the curiosity left in them anymore by the time they process all the data through all the spreadsheets and use that large IT solution that was procured at one point in history that required 5 different formats for every type of data that you needed. So in one instance, with GSA, they went ahead and outsourced the analysis to a firm that specializes in this, and that freed up their own staff to think more creatively about the problems. And one of the local governments, they actually stumbled upon a great hire, someone who could build their own system, And then later found out when they went to see if they could find a better system, those people ended up wanting to buy the system that was built by the local government. And they eventually hired that software engineer away. But anyways, they created the system that worked really well. And then the staff were no longer processing data all day through Excel spreadsheets. It was just in the system, things worked nice and smoothly. They enjoyed their jobs. The staff came back to the office. They were creative. They were finding solutions to budget problems that they were ignoring before because they were just exhausted processing data all day. So it created a much better work environment, fostered that creativity, and just generally made for a better place to work. And at the very end of our conversation, we talked a little bit about technology in a more global setting, about how when framed properly, in many environments, technology can increase the voice of those who have no voice. They can talk to their governments directly. Their government can talk directly to them directly. And if you had no mechanism for doing that before, and for anyone in a marginalized population, this is very empowering. And that was our technology discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that was fabulous. I saw a number of you taking pictures, right? Because it was really good stuff. So the good news is, and there isn't any bad news, the good news is that all of this will be written up and available on the NAPA website. But if we have your email address, and most of you, I think we have your email address anyway, if we don't, just give it to someone at reception and you'll be on the mailing list then, and we'll send it out to you, so you don't need to worry about having pictures of everything. Does that sound okay? Yeah. What sounds maybe better is a chance to follow up with your colleagues about some of these stories that you heard. So you can have 11 minutes, right? So if it's possible, come back at 10:45 and we'll start with the panel discussion. Thanks so much.